Hi, my name's Helen Sharp from the Knitting School in Seattle. This lesson came about from an email I had from a student asking if you could do brioche stitch on the knitting machine. And yes, you can. Machine knitters call it a tuck stitch. In fact, I have an idea that the tuck stitch was a machine knit stitch before it was a hand knitting stitch, which is one of the few times I think it happened that way round. And it's really easy to do on the knitting machine and actually much easier than it is to do by hand. So I'm going to show you several very easy to do machine knit tuck stitches and one harder version. Here's my well-loved Treasury of Knitting Patterns by Barbara G. Walker. And here is the brioche stitch according to this book. And in machine knitting, we would call this particular stitch a full cardigan stitch. Sometimes you see it called a fisherman's rib. And it's a very easy stitch to do by machine. And over here we have a brioche stockinette. And then here's another version of that. And here's a machine knit version. So this is just done on a single bed. This one is done on a rib. And this one kind of looks like a little honeycomb stitch. And again, it's very easy to do on the knitting machine. For this one, you'd need a punch card. Before I get on the knitting machine, I'm going to just show a couple of different ways to think about machine knit structures on the machine. So if we go back to this full cardigan stitch, at the bottom we've got a 1x1 rib, and then we've got the full cardigan in this section. So if I was to notate this fabric, my needles would be set up something like this for the main bed and for the ribber bed. And for a 1x1 rib, you could do a little loop drawing like this. And this particular way of drawing indicates a knit stitch. So this would be a notation for a 1x1 rib. For a full cardigan, the needle arrangement doesn't change. But what's happening on the machine does change. So I might, going in this direction, I might knit this stitch, tuck this one, knit, tuck, knit, tuck, knit, tuck. So the notation for a tuck stitch looks like this. So with a full cardigan, it's a 2-row sequence. So coming back the other way, you would tuck on the main bed and knit on the ribber. So that as a 2-row sequence is a fisherman rib or a full cardigan stitch. And as an alternate way of doing that, and this is the way that I would have learned it at school, I would, instead of doing the notations, I would do cam settings. So if you think of the knitting machine, it's like here's the carriage on the knitting machine, the ribber carriage and the main bed carriage, and here's like the gap between them. And then if you draw another line here, and what's happening on this side of the space is what happens when the carriage moves to the left, and what happens on this side is what happens when the carriage moves to the right. So you very concisely have shown what is happening in a 2-row sequence. And so for a 1x1 rib, you would knit both beds both directions, and for a full cardigan you would tuck opposite beds, opposite directions. And so with that, you would just need to add in your needle arrangement. And so I would probably do that. We used to do it like this anyway. So the little dot indicates a needle that's in working position. And then that combined with that and whatever your tension might be is all the information you would need to knit a full cardigan stitch with a specific fabric. So I'm just going to do the cam settings for a couple of other very commonly used rib-based tuck stitches. So these are both in a 1x1 needle arrangement. So that would be like this. And if I just tuck on one bed in one direction and knit in the others, that's going to give me a fabric called half cardigan. I've also seen this called shaker and English rib. This tends to be UK and this is US. And this one I've just seen in some different machine manuals. And then another common one is two rows like that. And then two rows like that. And the tucks can be on either bed. I put them up on the main bed, but they could be on the ribber. And the same here, this tuck could be in any one of those four. It's still going to create the same fabric. And this one is called a waffle or thermal. So together with the full cardigan, those are three very easy to do, commonly used tuck stitches, or if you're a hand knitter, you'd call them brioche stitches. So what's happening on the knitting machine when you're knitting or tucking is the needle, for a knit stitch, the needle pulls forward and the old stitch slides past the latch. The new yarn gets laid in and the needle pulls back and knits off the old stitch. For a tuck stitch, the needle comes forward, but not so far forward that the stitch slides off the latch, so it's still in there. The new yarn gets laid in and it's pulled back. So it's not the same as a knit stitch. It's not like a complete loop. It's more like a little bridge over the needle. And when you do tucking, in most cases, you want to isolate your tuck stitches between knit stitches. So the next stitch is going to be a knit stitch, then a tuck, then a knit stitch, then a tuck. So you've got knit stitches either side of your tuck stitches, but you can tuck on several rows on the same needle. So you can kind of pile those tuck stitches up to get a more exaggerated fabric, maybe up to about 4 rows. And the reason why this is so easy to do on a knitting machine is that it's just a question of setting the cams to pull the needles forward different distances. And for a single bed fabric, that would be done with a punch card. And for the full cardigan, thermal, and half cardigan fabric, that would be done by just saying knit all stitches or tuck all stitches on this row. So what I think my student was really asking me when she said, can you do a brioche on the knitting machine, is can you do a 2-color brioche on the machine? And as you can see from this swatch, you can. The reason I think she was asking that is because I've seen this particular fabric a lot in hand knitting patterns lately, and I've had several students asking me about it. And I remember this fabric from way back in the mid-80s when I was a sample knitter at a factory in England. And this is the book that I made when I was working in that factory. And it's been a really useful book throughout the years because I did keep pretty good notes. So if we look back here, you can see a 2-color brioche. And I actually remember knitting this fabric and thinking at the time how annoying it was to knit, frankly. But it is doable. And I wanted to also show you this page here, which has, it's a good indication of how I used to do my information on fabric. So I'd have my needle layout, I'd have my tension for the back bed and the front bed, different yarns that I was using, how many courses of each, and there's my cam setting. So I could go back at any time and reproduce this fabric. So back to the 2-color brioche. I'm going to show you why it is such a problem to knit on the machine. So here's my needle arrangement, exactly the same as a full cardigan, because that's essentially what it is. Knitting on the main bed, tucking on the ribber. And then the second row, tucking on the main bed, knitting on the ribber. So that's this direction, that's this direction. So in a 2-color brioche, you have 1 row of each color. So when you're working on a flatbed knitting machine, if you're doing a single row stripe, your color is always on the wrong side of the machine. So let's say if I knit this row in red, now my red is over here, then I switch to yellow, which is here, and take it across. Now my yellow is over here, and so is my carriage, but my red is over here. So then you have to take the carriage back across empty, and you also have to switch the cam settings because now you're on the opposite side of the carriage for what you want to do next. So you have to really concentrate when you're doing this fabric, but you do get into a little groove after a while. And I would say it took me maybe 20 minutes to make this little swatch. If it had been a solid fisherman rib, it would have taken me about 2 minutes. But if I was hand knitting it, it would have taken me about an hour. So there is some advantage to doing it on the machine. I'm working on my Brother 970 knitting machine, but this can be done on any machine with a ribber. And on this particular machine, to do a full cardigan stitch, I want to press one of the tuck buttons on the main bed. So I'll press this left one. And then down on the ribber bed, I do the opposite tuck button. So on this machine, to make it tuck, I'm going to move the right hand one up because I have the left hand one here. And then I'm going to move this little converter. It converts it from a misstitch to a tuck stitch. So I could just as easily do the opposite of that. I could press this tuck button, which is the main bed moving to the right, and the opposite tuck button on the ribber bed, which is moving to the left. So I'm ready to do a little bit of a full cardigan stitch. I've got my tension set to 3. I'm using a 2/14 lamb's wool yarn here, and I've got opposite tuck buttons. And I'm just going to knit like this. So in this scenario, when I move to the left, I tuck on the ribber bed. And when I move to the right, I tuck on the main bed. So after it's tucked one row, it knits off both the previous knit loop and the tuck loop. So you can see that's a really easy stitch to do. Now I'm going to start doing the 2-color brioche. So I want to change color here to yellow, and I want to tuck on the ribber bed. So every time I knit with yellow, I want to tuck on the ribber bed. Every time I knit with red, I'm going to tuck on the main bed. So to take the red out of work, I'm going to release the ribber carriage, take out the yarn, and just loop it on the side. And grab my yellow, drop that down between the two beds and put it into the feeder. So right now I don't have to change anything with the cams. I'm just going to knit one row. And now I'm going to take the yarn, the yellow out, hold it on the left hand side, and I'm going to take the carriage across empty. So on the brother machine, move this up, this one's down, and this is up. So both of the right hand part buttons are in work. And I'm just going to take this across and nothing will happen. Now I'm going to release the ribber carriage again, grab the yarn, and now I need to set it to tuck on the main bed going left. So I'm going to press my main bed tuck button and go across. My yellow is already here, so I'm going to put that in the feeder, take the red one out, and now I'm going to tuck on the ribber bed. Take the yellow out, hold the yarn on the side, and go across empty. So this time it's left hand part buttons. Just notice my yarn is stuck under the gate pegs there. So red goes back in. Red is going to tuck on the main bed. Yellow goes back in. Oops, let's get this sorted out. And we're going to tuck on the ribber bed. Go across empty. Pick up the red. Tuck on the main bed. Tuck on the ribber bed. So you can see it's not a smooth action. Definitely takes some time and fiddling around every single row. So it's not an ideal stitch to do on one of these machines, but if you really want to do it, it's possible. So I'm going to speed up a little bit now and get this piece off the machine so we can see what it looks like. Here's my swatch off the machine. You can see it has kind of one side that is more yellow and then the other side is more red. The yellow stitches are kind of tucked in between literally tucked in between the knit stitches. And on this side you can see the tuck stitches are red. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in machine knitting, you should check out my website, theknittingschool.com. I have classes running in January and March and all throughout 2019 in beautiful Seattle. And please subscribe to my channel, and I'd love to see comments and questions on the feed below.